Bipolar disorder and borderline personality disorder can look very similar, and they're easy to mix up. With both conditions, you might see mood swings, intense emotions, relationship issues, impulsivity, and risky behavior. Before my daughter was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, I didn't know much about BPD, and I didn't know how much it can look like bipolar disorder, which is why it's so often misdiagnosed. But you can tell the difference if you know what to look for. That's what I'm talking about today, how to tell the difference between bipolar disorder and BPD. I'm Patty, the girl with blue energy. I have bipolar disorder, and I make videos about mental health and personal growth. Because of how similar they can look, even professionals sometimes mistake BPD for bipolar disorder. In fact, up to 40% of people with borderline personality disorder were initially diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder. Before I get into it, I just want to say I'm not a doctor, I don't have BPD, and this video is not intended for diagnosing anyone. With that said, let's get into the signs that it might not be bipolar disorder, but actually BPD. So the first sign is mood swings. Now, with both bipolar disorder and BPD, you will experience mood swings, but they look very different. So someone with bipolar disorder has mood episodes. So if you have bipolar disorder, you will experience episodes of hypomania or mania and episodes of depression. And these last a period of time, usually at least 4 days, and they meet certain criteria. So they're not just spontaneous mood swings, they're mood episodes that last for around 4 days or longer. And with BPD, it's different because their mood swings are not in episodes. They're more spontaneous and they're triggered by something. So a lot of times the mood swings you see with BPD are triggered by a relationship issue or a situation that causes them to have an emotional reaction, and they will happen quick and suddenly, and their mood changes can be quite extreme, but they happen for short periods of time, not for days and days and days. So they do have extreme mood swings, but they don't happen in episodes. They also do not experience hypomania. It might look like hypomania because their mood swing, they may get a little bit more increased in energy, or they might be more impulsive, but they don't meet the criteria for hypomania. You don't see things like pressured speech and talking super fast or grandiose thinking. So their mood swings are more situational and more related to their relationships and things going on in their life. The next sign you want to look for is self-harm. Now, people with bipolar disorder and BPD can self-harm, but the statistics on this look very different, and the reasons why they self-harm is also different. About 37% of people with bipolar disorder self-harm at some point, but they typically do this during a depression episode, and it's not part of their regular routine. Like, they don't do this just anytime they're upset or can't deal with things. They may do this when they're extremely depressed. People with BPD, on the other hand, often self-harm. Up to 80% of people with BPD self-harm. And they don't just do this when they are depressed. They often do this repeatedly to deal with their emotions, and it may be triggered by situations in their life. So if they have a relationship issue or they get overwhelmed and don't know how to deal with their feelings, they may self-harm to deal with those feelings. It's pretty common in BPD, and you may see scarring on their body from previous self-harm injuries, or sometimes they will cover up the scarring with tattoos so you don't see it. Not everyone with BPD self-harms, but if you see scars or you know they self-harm, that's a good sign that they might have BPD. The next sign is unstable relationships. Now, I've talked about relationship issues with bipolar disorder before. So bipolar disorder can have relationship issues, but they don't look the same as what you see with BPD. With bipolar disorder, when there are relationship issues, it's usually due to a mood episode. So when someone's bipolar and they're hypomanic or manic, they may become really irritable and difficult to live with, or they make impulsive or risky decisions. They may have problems with hypersexuality and cheat on their partner. So bipolar relationships can be unstable, but it usually happens during mood episodes, and it's not a core feature of bipolar disorder. And not everyone who has bipolar disorder has relationship issues. On the other hand, unstable relationships is a core feature of BPD. In fact, it is part of their diagnostic criteria. So this is something you typically see with BPD, and it's not just with their romantic relationships, it's with all of their relationships. So their relationships with their family, their friends, their coworkers, all of this can be unstable due to the BPD. And you may see something that's called the I love you, I hate you, don't leave me cycle. And this happens in a lot of BPD relationships. They can be really clingy, or they can push away people, or they can hate you one minute and love you the next. This is kind of a pattern that's known to borderline personality, and many people struggle with this. Another thing you'll see with both bipolar disorder and BPD is emotional overreactions. Now, not everyone with bipolar disorder does this, but emotional dysregulation is a problem for most people with bipolar disorder. So we may get upset really easily or overreact or have a hard time calming down when we're upset, but it's not to the intensity that you see with BPD. People with BPD have very intense emotions and very intense emotional reactions. So when they get upset, they get extremely upset, and it can happen really quickly. But it's usually triggered by something, often a relationship issue or an emotion they don't know how to deal with, and they can get set off and get intensely emotional, like, I'm never going to speak to you again, I hate you. Sometimes it's anger, but they can also just get very reactive with their emotions, and their reaction doesn't fit the situation. Another sign to look for, they don't like being alone. This is not an issue with bipolar disorder. We don't have issues with being alone. With BPD, they have a huge fear of abandonment, and they also fear rejection. So they feel really uncomfortable with being alone. So they may get clingy with someone, or they may get into a relationship simply because they don't like that feeling of being alone. The next sign to look for is rage issues. So I've talked about bipolar disorder's problems with anger and rage before. Bipolar disorder and BPD can struggle with anger and rage, but they look different. So when someone with bipolar disorder struggles with their temper, it's usually due to a mood episode. When we get manic or hypomanic, we can get really irritable and difficult to deal with, and we can get frustrated really easily. And when we get in mixed episodes, which is kind of when you're depressed and manic at the same time, then we can get really irritable and get angry really easily. So we can have issues with rage, but it's usually because of a mood episode. We are not volatile all the time. We may have issues with emotional dysregulation, but that doesn't usually result in us having huge rage issues to the extent that people with BPD have. If you see rage issues, this is a big indicator that the person might have BPD. Rage issues is a big symptom of BPD. They have explosive, volatile tempers, and they can get really angry and explode really easily when they get triggered. This can just look like temper tantrum type behavior, or it can be more physical, so they may get in physical fights more easily. All or nothing thinking. This is something you see with BPD that you don't see with bipolar disorder. This is a big issue for people with BPD, and it's sometimes called black or white thinking, but it means that they have a hard time seeing gray areas or middle ground. It's all or nothing. You often see this in their relationships. So it might look something like this. So they have an argument. Now the relationship is all over. Or they have a disagreement. I'm right and they're wrong, and there's no middle ground. Or if I can't have you all the time, then I don't want to have a relationship at all. So this is something you often see with BPD. They have an all or nothing way of thinking, and it can interfere with their relationships because they have a hard time seeing the middle ground or working things out. It definitely can cause issues in all of their relationships. Impulsivity or risky behavior. People with bipolar disorder and BPD can struggle with impulsivity and risky behavior. But with bipolar disorder, you see this during hypomania or mania. So it's not an emotional reaction. When we do impulsive or risky things, it's during a mood episode. It's when we are hypomanic or manic. And it's not something you typically see all the time in bipolar disorder. It's just during mood episodes. With BPD, their impulsivity is usually due to an emotion or a situation. So it's triggered by something. And this is when you might see things like reckless spending, substance abuse, risky sexual behavior, or even binge eating. Constant emotional drama. Now, I'm not going to lie, people with bipolar disorder can have their fair share of drama, but it's usually tied to a mood episode, and it's not something that you constantly see with bipolar disorder. With BPD, it can seem like they're always having some type of emotional crisis. And this is because of their intense emotions and strong, quick mood swings. Plus, they often have volatility in their relationships and instability in their relationships, and add in the black and white thinking where they can escalate something instead of like understanding and having some middle ground. This can escalate into emotional drama. So you see a lot of emotional drama in BPD, especially in their relationships. Feeling empty. People with bipolar disorder can feel empty inside, but this usually happens when they're in a depression. So it's not a feeling they have all the time, just when they're depressed. And when they're not depressed anymore, they may go back to feeling happy or normal, but it's not a constant feeling for people who have bipolar disorder. People with BPD feel empty all the time. This is a big issue for them because they feel empty inside or unfulfilled much of the time. They may try to fill this empty feeling with substances or relationships, or they may struggle with future thinking like, I'll feel happy when I no longer live here. I'll feel happy when I get out of this job. And they may struggle with that kind of thinking. These signs are some ways you can tell the difference between bipolar disorder and BPD. The main difference between the two is that bipolar disorder, when you have mood swings, they happen during mood episodes. And with BPD, when there are mood changes, they are emotional reactions or they are triggered by something. Another big difference is that bipolar disorder is a mood disorder caused by biological changes in the brain. BPD is strongly linked to childhood trauma, although there may be a genetic component. Because their root causes are different, their treatment is also different. With bipolar disorder, the primary treatment is medications like mood stabilizers. BPD, on the other hand, is primarily treated with therapy. They use treatments like DBT or dialectical behavior therapy. There aren't any medications approved to treat BPD. They may use medications to manage the symptoms, but medication is not the main treatment for BPD. And to make things more confusing, bipolar disorder and BPD can occur together. About 20% of people with BPD also have bipolar disorder, and about 20% of people with bipolar disorder also have BPD. as you can see, there are a lot of reasons why BPD can get mistaken for bipolar disorder. I hope this helped make it easier to understand the differences between the two. If you found this video helpful, please click the like button and, of course, subscribe. I'll have another video for you guys real soon.